Welcome everyone to this session of Bear Grads, our webinar series on graduate student research and development. I'm Stephanie Ward. I'll be moderating the session. Robyn, our speaker, Robyn Hess, is the Associate Dean for the College of Education Behavioral Sciences. Prior to her move to administration, she was a faculty member in school psychology and has worked with over 30 doctoral students, helping them to successfully complete their dissertation. So she's going to talk to us all about that and getting through that. So I'll turn it over to you, Robyn.
All right, great. Well, hello, everyone. I'm glad you could be here tonight. One of the first things I want to say is I am at the end of a cold, and so my voice is a little funky tonight, and I apologize for that. So I might ask for participant input to give myself little breaks occasionally in what I'm talking, from speaking, but for now, again, thank you for that introduction, Stephanie. Yeah, the reason I wanted to do this presentation was like Stephanie said, I've worked with a lot of doctoral students, probably 30 plus, if not more. And, other than just the dynamics of like, how do you put together a proposal? How do you come up with an idea for a study? A lot of the questions are just around like, how do I get moving? Doctoral students, master's students are incredibly just overwhelmed with their coursework, with their clinical placements, with just everything that comes along with being a graduate student, as well as I know that a lot of our graduate students also hold part-time or pretty close to full-time jobs. So again, then you stack this huge writing process on top and people get stuck. It's just definitely a thing that happens. And so that's something I wanted to talk about for my 1 hour mini presentation on, successfully completing a thesis or dissertation project was, just this notion of what do you do if you've kind of moving along, you've got some great steam going and all of a sudden you're just like, oh, I can't get going again. I can't move forward. And so this is the presentation. It's getting unstuck, moving forward and completing your dissertation or thesis. And I also want to give a recognition to my graduate student, Ashley Coburn, because she helped with some of the, uploading some of the JPEGs and the little pictures that I have in my presentation. All right. If possible, I mean, I would love to hear from people where they're at in their process. It helps me kind of focus my presentation. If I knew like if people are stuck at a certain place or what you're working on, if you're doing thesis or dissertation, if you're at the proposal stage or I'm just starting to think about this stage.
Someone is defending the dissertation on May 2nd.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Someone else has been stuck trying to find a topic and get that approved for a while now. Working on my comprehensive written exam and writing my environmental scan. So those are some chat responses. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm working on my thesis. I'm pretty much done. I just need to do some edits, honestly, and then defend. Just getting stuck on those edits.
Wow. But you're very, very close. Nice work. Okay, and thank you for those of you who put it in the chat. I kind of forget about the chat function, but that's helpful too to let me know where folks are at. Okay, so let me move along. Some of this, especially for someone like you, Ezra, where you're so far along, will be like been there, done that, but just humor me because we do have somebody who sounds like they're at the very beginning of this process. And I feel like I'm stating the obvious here. Completing a thesis or dissertation, is this incredibly long, complex process. It's the biggest paper you're ever going to write in your professional career. We don't, as an academic, if any of you are going into the academic world, you're not going to write any more dissertations or thesis, that you'd write a manuscript, you'd write an article, not a 100-page document. And there's just a lot of process that goes into it, a lot of parts of getting your committee together, making sure that you have a project, that the project is approved, that you have all the paperwork in the grad school. So I like this little picture that my student had picked out of how to write your dissertation in a month and other fairy tales. And yeah, if you think you're going to knock this one out of the park over summer, it's not likely to happen. So just sort of setting yourself in there and kind of creating that mindset that this is going to be this process. And I'm going to, as with anything, any big complex project, you want to break it up into little parts so that you can keep moving on. If you look at sort of that final picture of, gosh, I have to have this whole thing done and it has to be this perfect project, you're never going to get started. So again, over the years, some of the places where I've found that people have gotten stuck is at, again, what is my project going to be? And I don't know if this is just unique to some students or my students, but I found people just would get so stuck in looking at the literature. They'd go get some articles, and then that would lead them on to some more articles. And then there were more articles. And then there was this one article they couldn't find in the library. So then they'd have to go see if they could get it on interlibrary loan. And then they couldn't move forward until they got that article. And so that, even though it seems like you're making progress, if you get stuck in that process too long, you're still stuck. So it may feel productive, but after a while, it's really not. And then you have, again, the writing up this proposal. And again, daunting task. You sit down and you have this white computer screen and a little blinking cursor, and you're supposed to now begin writing this 100-page document. And again, that is overwhelming. So again, we'll break that up a little bit. The last place, which this sounds like maybe where you're at, Ezra, and maybe there's somebody else out there who was toward the end or defending, it's just writing up those final chapters. You're tired, you're kind of sick of this topic. Maybe you didn't find what you thought you were going to find, and you have no idea what you want to talk about then in your last chapter. Or you feel like you've already said it all in those first 90 pages. What possibly could you have to add? Or like those little details. Oh my gosh, I know I need to go through and check my references and do my editing or do that. And that's not as fun, let's face it. So I can talk about that as well as some things that can help you maybe get over those humps. All right, so you have to decide on a project. And again, this is a project you're going to want to fall in love with because it's going to be your friend for a good year. And so that's really hard to say, what is it that I'm really interested in that I think I can do and that I think I'll have access to. So my field is psychology and school psychology specifically. So I would love to do 1 million studies in the schools, but go figure, they really don't want lots of people wandering in and collecting data from children during the day. And so it's a hard audience to get in to work with. So I have to think, where do I have supports? Where might I know a school district where they'll let me in, or a way that I can access kids for my research? So you have to think about also, like, not only is it doable, but do I have some kind of connection or something that will allow me to be successful in getting the data I need? I also think managing expectations. We're all idealistic, like, I'm going to do the research that's going to change the world. I'm going to do the project that will bring together these two schools of thought in the most significant way that it will be earth-shattering. That's a really, really hard expectation to put on yourself. So really think about, okay, maybe I did really want to answer this big question, and realistically speaking, maybe I'll carve out this little part and that's what I'll work on. And it will contribute. It will be important to answering that question. But any of that big research that just is like, wow, that's wonderful. That's really well-funded, grant-funded, multiple centers working together to gather data. It's not what you can do as a graduate student with limited time. So again, managing those expectations. And again, throughout this presentation, I've put down some ideas that I had about how you might, get past these stuck parts. They are not all inclusive. They are not the end all be all. It's just some ideas or some things that my students have done or I help them do that help them get them moving. One of the things that I always tell people is really think about something that you're interested in or a topic that you've really enjoyed. You've been in school, either in your master's program or your doctoral program, and you've been doing a lot of reading. What's interesting to you? What do you want to spend your time learning more about? Like I said, you spend so much time with these projects, you want to enjoy it. You want to be interested in what you're reading. I think sometimes people think, oh, I can get easy access to this data, so I'm going to do that as my project. Or my advisor's doing this thing, I'll just do that too. Or I'll do some small piece of it. But if you're not interested really in it, it's just kind of painful. I mean, you can do it, but it's just an exercise in sort of, I don't know, jumping through a hoop. It's not really something that at the end you're going to feel like, wow, I did that. That's great. And that's something, really want to think about. Try to enjoy what you're doing. It's all part of the ride, right? Choose a methodology that works for you. And your program might set that standard. So, right, there's qualitative or quantitative. If you hate numbers and you hate statistics, don't choose, a quantitative study. Pick something that fits for you. Or if you really love telling stories, and you love writing, a qualitative sounds like a really good fit for you. And not that you necessarily choose your whole project based on methodology, but if you have a couple of ideas floating around, it can help lead you maybe in one way or another. Like, I'm really interested in this topic and it fits really well with a qualitative methodology, and I love qualitative work. Again, it'll make your ride a little smoother. Beginning to generate different questions. And that's, again, I kind of encourage you, and I know all programs are different, and so your advisor might have told you how different way of approaching this, but, beginning to generate, I'll say, so I'll pick kind of when I did my dissertation back in the day. So I was interested, I worked in a school, and I was really interested in why there was such a high rate of dropout among kids who were from Latino backgrounds. And I worked in an elementary school, and I'd see these little kids who were so excited to be at school. And then their older brothers or sisters would come to pick them up. And, I'd say, oh, why are you at school? And they'd be like, oh, I don't go to school anymore. And I was like, wow, what is that? What's going on there? What happens along that way? Well, I could spend the rest of my life really studying that from that big perspective. And instead, I had to kind of whittle it down to something that could be done. And, again, I could have done a qualitative study and interviewed some of the high school kids who had dropped out. I could work with the younger kids and maybe identify behaviors that they're showing early on, and whether these differed between those who had older brothers and sisters who continued in school or those who had dropped out. That's what my project ended up being. Or I could maybe try to get a hold of the school's database and look at, do some kind of meta-analysis of programming that helped kids stay in school. There's lots of different ways to come at a question or come at a topic that you're interested in. And that's where I say, picking that methodology that fits with who you are, and then generating a few questions and being, within that context of a topic you love. And then that's when I bring those ideas to your advisor and really sort of start sorting through them. Which is most realistic? What do you think, I could really get done in a 1-year time frame, or whatever your time frame is? And I'm curious for the, if anyone wants to say more about how they pick their topics, that'd be really helpful, maybe to other folks. Or if you are stuck and what is my idea, what is the sticking point?
I'm the silly person who chose a topic based on ease of access and pretty much nothing else.
Okay.
I'm doing a thesis on sense of belonging in geology field camps. I was a research assistant on the project, which was initially aimed at looking at sexism in geology field camps, and kind of stumbled into this sense of belonging part and made it my thesis.
Okay. And how's that been? Sort of having something that maybe wasn't your first love.
You know, at first it was really like nice. I felt like I could be, invested in it, and it was, fun. It was new. It was not something that I had been super like well read in before. And now it's just a lot. it's it's kind of I was kind of indifferent towards the topic in the beginning, and now I kind of feel like I hate it. But once I finish, I'm sure I'll be happy with it again.
Yes. Right. The old saying, a good dissertation is, or good, in your case, a good thesis is a dumb thesis.
And we do have in the chat, I chose a topic that was close to the job I have now because I hoped that it would help me be better at my job, which I could see being a common thing. Here we have another, can you speak a bit more how students can progress or find strategies from finding a topic they find interesting to generating that research question and thinking of an original idea that will add to the literature while still making sure there's enough evidence to back up their theory? I've been stuck finding interesting topics, but then not being able to formulate anything innovative from that to begin the writing process.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take that innovative because, again, sometimes it comes to managing expectations. Sometimes innovative means not necessarily replication, but often when you read a study, and let's say you really love it, like, oh my God, that was a great study on this topic I like. There's always those limitations or future research sections at the end that say, well, nobody's ever really looked at this with, individuals from lower socioeconomic status, or, people have not really looked at this among non-traditional college students. I know I'm making things up off the top of my head, but so sometimes that's the tweak or the innovation that you add is taking what was a really good project or, had a lot of promise to it and expanding it or extending it or tweaking some other aspect of it. And that's also where qualitative can sometimes come in versus quantitative, or vice versa. Maybe you read a really great qualitative study and it's time to take it to that next level of, what if I could get a bigger sample and look at this aspect of this experience with this group? That sometimes is a way to move it from, I like this, here's some great articles I'm reading, but what do I do? I don't know if any of that's helpful, but those are some ideas. Again, putting too much pressure on yourself to come up with this entirely novel idea, that's really hard to do. I mean, there's a lot of people out there in the world doing research. And it's really hard to come up with just an absolutely 100%, nobody else has ever thought of this idea. And that, again, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself and thinking about how can I add, what can I contribute to the literature versus how can I totally innovate it? I'm going to go through these kind of quickly because I'm realizing I'm not managing my time well. And I'm giving you this presentation on managing your time. So the literature review. So I'm a little bit of an odd duck when it comes to helping students get started in their writing. So again, we first have that conversation about what's your idea, what are you interested in, and really loosely coming up with research questions. I think it's really hard to formulate an exact research question until you've done, really gotten into the literature and read about the topic quite a bit. And so that's where I have my students start is really digging in and deciding sorry, I'm looking at my other slides here. Deciding like, what is my research question? What's my topic area? And then beginning to do that deep dive into the literature. Where I see people get stuck is like they'll start reading about one topic, and then that topic sort of leads them to another topic, which then leads them to another topic. And so not only do they not know maybe where to stop in terms of finding literature, I also call this a rabbit hole, is like when to reel it back in. Like you don't really have to, one, go back to the history of time, although I see somebody has a composition of Great War Requiem. So in that case, you might go back to the beginning of time. But anyway, usually you don't have to just like trace the entire history of whatever your topic is. It's helpful to give a little context to it, but just not getting so bogged down in that. I'll cover that or close this for a minute. And so then that comes up like, how much do I have to talk about these things? This is something I would talk about with your advisor. And kind of what their perspective is, because all advisors are a little bit different. Some like really quick, concise literature reviews. Other people really want you to do that deep dive and maybe want you to cover more than you normally would. So maybe getting a sense of that. My stance is you will be working with a committee who may or may not have knowledge of your topic. So if you can think of it from the eyes of your reader, an uninformed reader, let's say, like how much would they need to know in order to understand your topic or to move on to the next section of your topic? It usually doesn't have to be super long and super detailed. It just has to be enough that someone can go, oh, okay, I understand what that thing is now, that I can move along now and understand this next topic that you're introducing. I know that's a little vague. I can't say 3 paragraphs and that will work. But, again, think about what would my reader who's not necessarily, they're obviously a sophisticated reader because they're a faculty member, but they might not know your topic area. So how can you help them understand that to help move them along and understand your study that you're proposing? I think people also get stuck in this idea that they just have to keep looking for the newest article. There must be one more thing out there that I could put in. It's like, stop. It's okay. There'll be a time when you come to your chapter 5 when that's the time to go look for any new literature that has come up, but you don't have to have the most recent in everything of your list in your lit review. I also think I never had understood this until a student was asking me some questions like, how on earth do you read all of these studies? Every study that you get, that you collect and you've organized into these little topic areas, some are really specific to your area, to your topic, and you want to read those really well and understand them. Some are maybe giving an overview of a related topic that's necessary to understand, maybe how you got to point B in your review, but you really don't have to read it at that level, that depth of level. So skimming it and finding the important areas that helps build, again, like that logic for why you're talking about, a certain topic or where it's been, it's, I don't know, like just setting the context, let's say. You can skim those articles. You have permission to not read every single word. And that will save you some time. I think, like I said, some people get bogged down in reading these really long articles, maybe really detailed statistical articles that are just kind of on the periphery to what they want to write about. And so making that decision, like I can skim this, or I can really just look at their conclusion or look at a couple things about what they did. Maybe it's about an instrument that they used to make sure that it's appropriate for my audience, whatever it is that you're doing. And you can just, like I said, read those a little more lightly and then save your in-depth understanding, reasoning for those things that are more related to your topic. And I already talked about rabbit holes. Again, I love to write. And so sometimes I have to kind of contain myself when I'm writing as well. And I always think about like making an outline first. What do I want to say about this topic? And it's also a way for you to think about, if you create kind of an outline, it's also a way for you to start organizing your articles, right? You're going to go grab all these articles. Now you're going to have like all these computer files of articles. And that's not very useful to you, right? They're just like, okay, I have this thing called dissertation, or I have this file called thesis articles. Think about, like, if you make an outline, then you can say, overview of, I'll say school completion, going back to what I said my dissertation was about, school completion, Latino children in schools. And that's how I'm going to organize my files. And that also might be how I have organized my outline. And so I'm starting from the very beginning to try to put some structure to all of what I'm doing. And that helps me, because one of the things people get stuck in is, I read this great comment. It was a really good quote. I loved it. And it was somewhere in one of those articles. And then they get stuck looking for that one quote that was great in that one article. Not a productive use of your time. If you have a little bit organized and you have some way of going like, oh yeah, I think it was about, Latino kids in school, then at least you could go to those 4 or 5 articles that you have in that section. But again, try to begin organizing from the very beginning with an outline, with how you organize your articles in your computer files. And trying not to be too, depending how much you break up your topic areas, maybe just at first saying, I'm going to just find 3 to 4 really good articles for each of those. I don't need 20 articles. I don't need the article from 1980 that was published in my personal journal, which has a distribution to 10 people. You just don't have to put that in there. It's okay. Really think of the bigger journals, the more recent work, more comprehensive articles, and have 3 to 4 good ones that you use as you're building or thinking about or learning about your topic area. And if you're writing along the way, that's fine too. So anyway, that's what I'm referring to with the good organizational schema. The more you have that in place ahead of time, the smoother it will make your writing in the future. As you then have organized this, you might find places where you have gaps, like, oh, I'm talking about this thing, and all of a sudden then I'm talking about this thing, but I haven't ever created the link between the two. Or I'm not sure what research has maybe tried to look at both of these things together. So maybe that gives you a really focused area to go look. And the more focused you can be in your lit search, the better able you are then to find these really specific articles that help you advance how you talk about a topic, or advance your reader through the flow, the logic that brings them to, like, gosh, you have a brilliant study. Of course, this has to be done. And then organizing your references as you go. I think that's one of the big mistakes. And now we have some great computer programs that allow us to, each time we're either writing or collecting, to just kind of click on those and say, yep, there it is. I'm using this little piece here, this little piece there. So now you're ready to write your proposal. And again, hopefully you've been talking with your advisor along the way, and you have approval for your questions, and, or, even if they're kind of broad and they're not totally nailed down yet. Like I said, I like to start with a chapter 2, because I feel like it gives me or my student enough information to be able to really kind of hone those questions in, to know what's been done already, to know what kinds of instruments people have used, if you're going to use some kind of instrument in collecting your data. It just gives you a lot of information. So again, I start with chapter 2. I know some advisors like chapter 3, they are all about the methodology. They want to see that first. I think chapter 1 is the hardest one, so I tend to encourage people to do that last. you have your research questions, but now you're going to do sort of this broad brush strokes kind of overview of your topic, which sort of makes the case for why it's important to do. And now you have all that information because you've done your chapter 2, and you have to kind of back off and do it in a more, I'm looking at this topic from way above, and this is how I would describe why it's important and what we know about it and what the gaps are and why my study's so important. And here are my questions. So you're getting ready to write your proposal. And I would say one thing is sometimes that first sentence can stop you in your tracks. You're like, wow, I want it to be really impactful. I want it to really grab people. Like, I don't know if you're readers or, a good novel, that first sentence is just like, whoa, I like that. I'm going to read this book. Again, that's a lot of pressure. So just make a sentence, just move on. Don't get stuck. I also feel like just having that blank page can kind of be overwhelming. And that's where I just cut and paste my outline in there. At least I have some words on a page, and I'll just start filling in like those sections below the outline, and I can make it make sense later. I can connect those and do the transition sentences and all that good stuff. Like the little fish say, writing, writing, writing. Yes, to some degree, writing is good, but not just writing to be writing. There is a point where it's like, you're so far off topic, your reader has no idea what you really actually want to study at this point, because you just have all this information and it's kind of in the middle of what was a logical flow. And now I don't know where you're going or why you're going there. So more writing is not necessarily better. It's not like just fill 50 pages. It's, make them tell a story, make them lead to something. And this is what brought me to my last point, which I think is always hard for people, is let's say you did go down a rabbit hole. Sometimes you have to just delete it. I'm sorry. It may have taken you a whole Saturday afternoon, and maybe it just doesn't have a place. What I always tell people, don't get rid of it. Maybe put it in a file and call it outtakes. And maybe you will find a home for it later on when you're doing your discussion, or in some other part, it will be useful to you. And so it doesn't feel like a total waste, but maybe it just doesn't belong where it's at in that paper or in your proposal or that chapter. I know this number 1 sounds super obvious. I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation with someone who's again, like maybe taking, 10, 11 credits, maybe working a part-time job, doing a practicum or some kind of field experience. And I'm like, well, when are you going to write? Maybe on the weekends. You really do have to figure out a way. You have to give yourself permission to schedule in time to write. At a time when you're fresh and able to really do that thinking that you need to do. And you also need to kind of know yourself as a writer. Some people can't do like hour blocks because it feels like you're always starting over or figuring out, where you were left off. So maybe you need to figure out 4-hour blocks, and maybe that is a weekend writer. But, really blocking that out. It doesn't just magically happen. You're not going to come home from work or a full day of school or whatever and go, gosh, I think I'll just whip out my writing now and start working on my dissertation. It takes a very, very disciplined person to do that. I think I've already talked about the resources to really help you organize, but again, some of the referencing programs, anything else you can think of in terms of how you've organized things in your computer files is helpful to you. Set deadlines. And for my students, I would always say, when are you going to get that to me? But maybe or sometimes they would say too, like, okay, I need a deadline. I'd say, well, set your deadline. When are you going to get it to me? And then I'd write it in my calendar. And if you're somebody who really needs a deadline, maybe do that. And maybe it's with your advisor, but maybe not. Maybe it's with a writing buddy, or maybe it's with a significant other or whomever, that there's something more telling you that you need to move forward than just you going, yeah, I'm going to get this thing done. Sometimes you're not feeling a certain section, maybe you're just like, I don't want to write about this thing right now. Maybe work on your methods section for a little bit, or maybe work somewhere else. It doesn't have to begin with your first sentence and then each subsequent sentence until you're done with your chapter 3 for your proposal. You can jump around, like, I can't find those articles I was looking for in my lit review. I have an idea where I'm going. I think I'm going to do my methodology section. I just met with my stat consultant. I know exactly what I'm going to do there. So I'm going to work on that. And then I can come back to this thing. So do give yourself permission to jump around a little bit. And last thing, I think I have a whole other slide on this, so just a sec. But if you love this topic, you've maybe already written about it in different formats. Maybe you turned in a paper on it. Maybe you gathered, I don't know, some other work on it for something else, or you had an essay question on it, or it was on your comps. I don't know, whatever it might be. Go ahead and use that. I mean, not all of it, obviously, don't like totally plagiarize it, but if it's the history of education in the United States, for whatever reason, let's say you want to have that in there, and you've already written about the history of education in the United States, feel free to pull that paragraph in, maybe cut it, make it work for your project you're working on now, but realize that you've already maybe done some of this work and can use it in different ways again. Also, obviously, by this point, you want to finalize your research or your guiding questions, depending, on your methodology. I always say, think of your methodology as following a recipe that is just so detailed and prescriptive that you could just, again, the purpose of it is so somebody could replicate your study. Think of all those details. It also really helps you later on, after your committee has said, great, you're good. You're free to go forward with your project. That you have this written out that tells you what you're supposed to do. I think we put so much energy into getting the proposal ready to go. And then once we have approval, it's like, wait, what did I say I'd do again? Like, how was I going to recruit these people? What? And reading this over again, and if it's really detailed, you know exactly what you said you were going to do. When it comes time to do your analysis, whether it's a qualitative analysis or a statistical analysis, you said you were going to look at assumptions. You said you're going to do this. You said you were going to use this methodology to analyze your qualitative data. Begin doing it. It really helps you too, even though it might be a little annoying ahead of time to write out all this detailed information. Once you have a good draft, that's the time to go back and look for those little things like, ooh, this isn't a great transition sentence, or I could write a little bit more about this topic. Don't get hung up on those little things early. Let that be a later thing when you really kind of have it all crafted. How about other ideas? What have other people found to be helpful in your lit review, or sorry, in writing your proposal?
I use like voice to text to get the blank screen problem out of the way. I just will recruit a friend and be like, listen to me ramble about this for a little bit. And then I've got all of this information already there.
That's awesome. Yeah. If like, hey, I'm more of an oral person, I love to talk, use that. That rather than being like, okay, I have to put this into these perfect words, and that's just not my thing. Now, I don't know, this might be a little controversial, but I was talking with another student, and they used AI to organize themselves. And I don't know exactly how they did it, and I haven't ever gotten to Chat GPT, so maybe some of you who know more about this would have a better idea. But basically talk to Chat GPT about how would you organize a paper about, this, that, and the other thing. And I guess it kind of will suggest organization. And if that, again, if organization is not your thing, that you're thinking of here's a topic, and here's a topic, and here's a topic, and here's a topic, something like that can just help you say, oh, okay, this is maybe how it would flow. And it could just save you time and a lot of corrections when somebody's like, well, this really doesn't flow into that. So what's the connection between these two? Or why is this paragraph in the middle of these three things? I like this little logo. I found this one, or this little, whatever they're called, JPEG, there we go. And I have a couple students, right? I've moved into administration recently. So any of my students I'm working with right now are kind of at that last stage because, they've kept with me as I moved into administration. So now they're kind of done with their dissertations or almost, and are writing up their chapter 4 and 5. And you'd think, gosh, I have this huge, we fast forward, you've written the proposal, the committee has loved it, you've moved forward, you have your data, you've run your analysis. It should be easy at this point, right? And it's just not, because it's usually also when you're almost done with your program. And maybe, depending on the type of program you're at, you maybe have found your job. You're in that position and it's just, you're finishing up your dissertation while you're working. For my students, they go into clinical settings. And so, most of the people who come into my field love clinical work. And so they're loving their days where they're seeing clients or they're doing different kinds of things. And at night, they have to go work on their dissertations. That's hard. You're just trying to balance so many different things. And you're really ready to be done and to be at that happy, I don't have to think about this anymore. And it's not done. And so, yes, people really get burned out. They're tired of their study. They're tired of their topic. They feel like they've already said it all. They're so ready to be done. They don't want to, I don't know. And then, sometimes I've had people whose studies were not significant. And they're like, well, what do I write in a chapter 5? I don't have anything to say because it didn't work. You don't get to skip your chapter 5 if you don't have significance. You still have to write it. And you just talk about what you think, how you're studying, the same thing you would do if you had significance, except you just say that you didn't. And always remember that you don't fail your dissertation if you don't have significance, if you're doing a qualitative or quantitative study. That is one of the good things. Most faculty look at it like we've taught you how to be a researcher. We've taught you how to think about a project and carry it out from point A to point Z. And if you've engaged in that process and you've done what you said you were going to do, it just doesn't matter whether you found significance or not. Obviously, it's disappointing, for you because you put all this time and energy into it, but it doesn't make it like, oh, wow, then you're not going to pass. And I think sometimes students have that concern, like, oh my God, I'm not going to pass because I didn't find what I wanted to find. I think of chapter 4 as being pretty straightforward. And just like the methodology was pretty straightforward, who are my participants? If I'm using any kind of measures or questionnaires, what do they look like? What's my procedure? What stats am I going to use, right? Chapter 4 almost kind of looks like that again, a little different order. What did I do? Who ended up being my participants? What did I find? How did I answer question 1, 2, and 3? It's a little more detailed, obviously, if you're doing qualitative. But you have guiding questions. So, show your analysis of your data, how you did it, and again, what themes you came up with and how those themes answer your guiding questions. So quantitative is much easier with a chapter 4. Chapter 4 qualitative is a little more detailed. I don't really have time to get into that, but again, just use what you said you were going to do, your analysis that you said you do. How did the themes emerge? What themes were there? And again, how do they answer your question? I think that's sometimes what I see with the qualitative people get really excited about writing up what they learned and what the themes are, but they forget to go back and then connect them to their guiding research question. One thing I tell people is as you're doing this, as you're doing your analysis, just put little notes to yourself or flag things, anything that was interesting. My student just did a study on a little exercise program that she did in a school. And it was supposed to be with third, fourth, and fifth grade girls, and she couldn't get any fifth grade girls to participate. That's interesting. I mean, and part of it was she knew that as girls get older, they're less likely to engage in physical activity. And she was seeing that, right in real time in terms of her study. So I told her to flag it and then to really come back to that in her discussion, even though it's not an answer to a research question, but it was an interesting observation that she made. And it also then leads to an implication about how important it is to start exercise programs earlier in the schools, because you're going to kind of start to lose kids from being interested in that kind of activity the later you start them. Anyway, so make little notes to yourself. Another reason for doing that is you're still a little more energized when you're analyzing your data. By the time you get to chapter 5, you're just a little more burned out, a little more tired of it. And you can go back to those notes and say, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about that thing. I'm going to put that here. Oops, I wanted to talk about this thing. I'm going to put that here. Then it just gives you more to talk about in your chapter 5. Now I'm moving on to chapter 5. There is a strategy for organizing it. You review, like, this was my study, this is what I said I was going to do, here's what I found is related to each of my research questions, not the detail that you have in chapter 4, but from a narrative perspective. And then you also will highlight what others have found. And this has been a unique thing I've found from students, is they do all this highlighting what other people found, and then at the bottom they're like, yeah, I found that too. And it's like, no, it should be the other way around. Really highlight what you found and then how that relates to previous research or how it was different from previous research. It's also a time to go back and maybe look at the literature. Maybe there is something new out there that contributes to why you found what you found, or somebody else has also found that thing, or helps to explain why you didn't find that thing. I also say on this one, you actually have to probably write more than you think. Again, there's this sense of, I've said everything I need to say. I answered, I went through everything, and I now have a 5-page, chapter 5. You got to give it a little more oomph. You really want to show your committee that you thought about your study, that you reflected on it. And what I had written here, you have to use all these really higher order cognitive skills at this point, at the point where you at least have them, at least for this topic. You want to integrate and reflect and analyze and, really have this great ending to your thesis or dissertation. And you're doing it, like I said, with kind of a little less energy. So this is one to take breaks on, come back to, maybe get just a draft, a working draft, take a break, come back to it, maybe work on a section of it, take a break, come back. So you can, each time you come to it, you can bring something new and deeper. And like I said, that just really shows your committee that you did that think work about your own study and how it relates to, and what its place is in, the body of literature that it's going to go out for, or be a part of. Okay. Some days you're not feeling it. So Ezra, it sounds like you may have gotten to this point at sometimes. You're just not ready to do this. One, I'm going to start at the bottom. Give yourself permission to take a little break. I know that's hard to do because there's all these little deadlines that are creeping up. But sometimes you just have to give yourself a break. Sometimes a break might look like writing in a different setting, or making it more fun, like go write with somebody and have lunch afterwards, or have a coffee and then write together, say that you'll write together, or do whatever, do your editing for an hour while you drink coffee or whatever it is you do. Eat a meal afterwards, or like I said, just kind of make it such that you can bring a little pleasure to whatever that thing is that you have to get done. I also so my big goal here is, as long as you're moving forward in one way or another, you're making progress. It's going to have to get done at some point anyway. And sometimes people save all of this for the end, and maybe you don't have to. Maybe you can mix it up a little bit and say, I really want to create a figure of how all my literature went together. And I never did that because I wanted to just get my proposal approved. I'm going to work on that now. Or maybe I can use something like that when I talk about how my themes fit together. you're going to have to do this front matter, like your acknowledgments and your table of contents and your copyright page. Maybe that's all you got in you for the day, and that's your bandwidth, is I'm going to do those 3 pages. Great. Or maybe you've tabled all these APA style or formatting questions. Maybe it's time to go through and look at those or fix your references, whatever it is. Like I said, you're going to have to do it anyway. So maybe when you're just not feeling like writing, you could be doing that kind of stuff, because it isn't as sort of cognitively burdensome, if you will, or not. You don't have to be quite as engaged to do those things as you do to write a chapter 5. And that was my last slide, is just if anybody had any questions.
Yes, thank you all for participating. I put a link for feedback, and I'll put a link to the Bear Grads toolkit, where there might be some tools to help with some of these things that Robyn talked about. And thank you, Robyn, for taking the time to do this. And
There we go.
yeah, if anyone has any questions here in these last couple minutes, otherwise, thank you all for coming.